Okay, hello everyone. Assalamu alaikum. I'm your host Alia Noor, and with me I have Arif Zaman. He's head of internal audit, MR Industries and Investment. So basically, this Auditor League's purpose is that it's a learning platform where you can access latest practices, updates, innovation in the field of fintech, audit, tax, finance, with a vision of maximizing time efficiency by connecting industry global experts who share their success stories, opinions, advice, and best practices. Here, everything is connected, where you can learn how to think like an outthinker and come up with a fourth option. I'm your host, Alia Noor, and I'm the founder of Experts League, and I'm working at Ahmed Al Akbari as associate partner. But what is the fourth option? Let's go back in time. In 240 BC, there was a general in ancient China standing with his army of 10,000 men uphill against 50,000 men on other side of the river. He was outnumbered 5 to 1, but that was not the worst part. In order to attack, he has to go down the valley to the river, cross the river in a narrow ford, and then go up another hill in order to attack the enemy. There isn't saying that you don't want to battle uphill. It's the worst possible attack position. The journal has three strategic options. Should he stack? Should he attack? Should he wait? Or should he try to go around? What happens if he attacks? If he goes down through the fort and then tries to go up to the hill, the enemy will come down the hill and wipe them out. The second option is should he wait? If he waits too long, the enemy will simply go across the river and attack him. The enemy are in much greater numbers. So they will be wiped out. The third option is should he try to go around? Maybe he can, kind of, go to another part of the river and flank the enemy and then come back behind them. Well, if he does that, then the enemy can just march through unobstructed, unstoppable passage to his home city. So, what should this journal do? How should he address a set of three equally unappealing choices of if he attacks, he gets wiped out. If he waits, he gets wiped out. And if he tries to go around, he gets wiped out. So, what did the journal do? This is called the process of outthinking. What will you do? It's a methodology that will help you keep with what Kai Krippendorf calls the fourth option. The fourth option is disruptive, it's inventive, it's breakthrough, it's something that no one you're competing against has thought about, and it gives you the path to victory. In our case of general in ancient China, what he did was he sent a small number of his troops way upstream, upriver, and he had them dam up the river by putting sandbags. So the water level dropped. So suddenly now, instead of a narrow ford, there is a wide plain that you could just walk or ride across. Seeing this, the enemy general ordered his troops to attack because now he could put his entire force in mass and kind of encircle this small army of general. So Journal army engaged the enemy, and when half of the rebels get to other side of the river, they release the dam. So he turned the situation which he cannot win into one he cannot lose. This is an example of outthinking, how to move forward when faced with strategic uncertainty. This outthinker invent the fourth option. They do the risk assessment. They make a risk-based plan. So, ladies and gentlemen, we present you the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen with our first episode with Mr. Arif Zaman. Arif Zaman brings with more than a decade of proven experience in internal audit, risk management, and fraud investigation. He is head of internal audit at MR Industries and Investment. He has been associated with HSA Group, Telenor, and EY. He has authored several technical articles which were published at Institute of Internal Auditor magazines. He is a keynote speaker at several summits and conferences on the topic of internal audit, risk management, corporate governance, and he has been interviewed for his achievement by ACCA IA 360.
Thank you, Alia. Thank you for the nice introduction.
Yes, and what will he be covering? Thank you, Arif. You have to think like a out thinker, and Mr. Arif will help you to how to be act like an invisible man and do the risk based audits. You have to think how and why is risk based important, and are you doing a risk based audit, and how to carry out risk assessment. In next section, he will teach you how to think like a hunter, how to do a risk assessment. You have to think again how to assess and how often you are doing annual risk assessment and how you are carrying out risk assessment. And last, he will teach you how to formalize annual audit plan and audit engagement. Up to you, Arif.
Thank you, Arya. Thank you very much for such a nice introduction and give it and with the context which you have given us. And could you please put it the presentation here? Could you put, do you have that? Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
Thank
can you
you.
skip?
Yeah, I can see. Yes, the first slide. Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for giving such an overwhelming response to this webinar. I wasn't expecting that such a huge number of people will show up for this webinar. Considering the fact that it's a bit technical and it's a very fundamental and critical topic for irrespective of whether you are internal auditor, compliance auditor, or HSE or any other field domain, because currently the risk-based audit is something which is in the talk, and everyone expect that the resources is utilized to the high risk areas. The objective which I come up with this webinar is that to facilitate the attendees, to give them some practical advice based on my experiences, based on my knowledge in this field. And because in the start of my career, I struggle a lot with this area, especially the annual planning process, and it used to be a nightmare for me. So I will just share my experiences and the objective which I believe that if I could derive from this webinar is that if you feel a bit more confident in your planning processes based on risk, and also if you can take away something in which you can apply practically in your engagements or within your internal audit department, that will be a success factor for me. So I will try to keep things very simple. The reason why I personally do not like complicated terms and jargons and things which make other people more stressful. So I will try to keep it simple, logical, and you can go into much more depth and detail and sophistication as you want once you have the basic idea, once you have the basic grounds and the fundamentals of the key elements in the risk-based audit, then you can draw any tower on the top of those foundation. So let's start. And Alia, I just want to need to know that the poll question will pop up with, I mean, if there is a possibility to have to see the number of people who respond and what will be the percentage towards each pop-up poll question.
Hi, Mr. Arif. There is a
Hello.
Q&A section you can see in the screen. So the
Okay.
people who have the questions, they can post it in the Q&A section. At the end of the webinar, we can answer all the questions.
Okay, that's cool. Will it automatically pop up or do I have to ask? And Alia, I think I updated this presentation, so it is not the latest one because it's start with the one poll question for, I don't know whether do you have that copy, if it's possible, the latest one, because it doesn't have the first pop-up question, poll question. If that could be possible, otherwise I can still take through the presentation, but that will help the other people, the audience, to know exactly what is the practices and what are the things which they carry out in within their domain in their department. So it will be quite engaging. So just see, this is the previous version.
Wait, Arif, I'm opening it.
Yeah, that will be great. So, to all the audience who are attending this webinar, my objective is to that it should be an interactive session, and you share your experiences. You share, yes, exactly. This is the one. So, yes, this is the poll question. So, you share your experiences, you share your thoughts, and through the poll questions, because this will allow everyone to understand in which direction the internal audit fraternity is moving, and what you are doing, is it aligned with the majority practices, and is it the right thing to do or not. So, this will give us a guideline by which we can further foresee and direct our audit activities. So initially, from the audience, the first question, the poll question which I have is: have you ever done risk-based audit part of your job responsibility? So if you could reply to this, so I can see a lot of participants is saying yes. So here, Alia, I just want to know that how we can know the percentage of the responses. What is the percentage? So we can allow a 30 second time period for this question and see.
Hmm.
And
More
what
than
is the
80%
percentage?
has a affirmative answer.
How many?
More than 80%.
More than 80. Okay, that's great. So it's mean that majority of the people are pretty much aware of the risk-based audit. So why I ask this question is because I just want to know the caliber of the people who are attending this presentation and webinar. So based on that, I can touch base upon some technicalities. However, I will still try to keep it a bit simple for everyone to understand. So that's a great response. So majority of the people have a relevance to the risk-based audit. And now let's start the presentation. And during the presentation, I will also keep on asking you a question in order to know exactly what basically you are doing and how it is supposed to be done. Can we move to the next slide?
Yes.
So great. So basically, if you look from the internal audit perspective, there is an institute called Institute of Internal Auditor, which give you the frameworks, standards, and the best practices which we are supposed to follow as internal auditor. So based on the IIA, they ask us to carry out a documented risk-based assessment, and that has to be carried out annually. So it is
Hello? Okay. Why? Hello?
Hello, can you see? Can you hear me?
There is a problem with the Wi-Fi connection.
No, it's working. I I think we just lost the connection. Mr. Arif will be back in a while. Just stay with us. Just bear with us. We will be here.
Hello?
Yes, Arif,
Yeah, okay.
we
Let's
can
take
hear
it.
you.
Yeah, yeah. Apologies for the technical issues. Okay, so basically, if we have to set a foundation, like why we need to have a risk-based audit. So based on the Institute of Internal Auditor, it's a prerequisite as per the standard that we have to carry out a risk-based audit, and that has to be
Sorry, Arif, we
documented.
cannot
Yeah.
see you. Can you please turn on your video?
Okay, 1 second. Yes.
Yeah, you're on.
So
Thanks.
basically, based on the standard, we have to carry out a risk-based audit. We have to carry out a risk assessment, and the time frame which they have mentioned is annually. That this is the bare minimum standards which give us the framework under which we have to carry out a risk-based audit. So how we can go about the risk-based audit? This I will keep on explaining in the upcoming next slides. However, if you move to the next poll question, Alia, that will be great. Yeah. So this is my question to the audience. Like, do you carry out a documented risk assessment? And I just want to see that what is the response with the majority of the auditor, that what is the practice is in the market, or how practical it is. Yes, Alia. So after 30 seconds, you can just tell me the results of the poll. What is the percentage?
Okay, affirmative.
Okay, that's great. So the majority of the people, they do carry out the risk assessment. So let's have a discussion in the upcoming slide that what is risk assessment. Can you move to the next slide? Okay, so basically, let's going back in the history that initially the internal auditors, the audit engagements were based on more on a compliance method. That if you see the evolution of how auditors has emerged from being compliance partner to a risk-based auditor, you will see that initially the expectation from the auditor were more in towards the compliance towards the laws and regulation, then it comes to the policies and procedures. And going forward, there were a lot of issues which emerged being just typical compliance auditor. That there were issues in related to the internal controls. There were issues related to efficiencies and other productivity matters. So based on that, the evolution has keep on happening, and then we come up with the concept of a risk-based audit. That internal audit has a limited resources, they have a limited time frame, and that resources need to be focused more on the risk which are more relevant to the business and more relevant towards the achievement of the organizational objectives. So in order to cater for those needs, the concept has emerged of a risk-based audit. And when we talk about the risk-based audit, our whole methodology of annual planning process and audit engagement evolves around the risk. So it's something which is more logical, but then there are certain kind of fundamentals, there are certain kind of market practices which we follow in order to achieve those objectives. So if you look into the screen, the annual planning key steps, you will notice that there are 5 mainly steps which we are supposed to have to carry out in order to reach out to an annual risk-based audit plan, and accordingly then we can execute an audit engagement. So these steps will be will I will touch base upon in the presentation, but at a high level, it is about having an audit universe, to have a risk assessment, align the risk assessment with the organizational goals, prioritize the risks, and then based on those risks, you have to shortlist the audit engagements which you intended to do in the upcoming year. So can we move to the next slide, Alia? So initially, the first step, the preliminary steps which any auditor is supposed to carry out that to establish their scope of audit. Let's say if you step in into any organization as a new auditor, you need to know what are the areas which you might or which you might ask to do, or what is the total areas or auditable units which an organization where you can perform the audit engagements. So generally, what we are supposed to do that we have to break down the entire organization. Let's say if you have 100% resources without any limitation to the time or to the team. So if you have to do an 100% audit, how you will break down the entire organization in the auditable units, and there are different ways of doing that. So is there is a standard to do that? No, there isn't. Is there is any best practices to do that? That's based on your industry, your company, and the culture and the organization. So the best way is to tailor things to the need of your organization. This is how you will be more relevant and more aligned toward the risk. Generally, I do not recommend to have one set of rules for all organization or all set of industries. I would rather recommend people to see and deep dive within the organization and see how they wanted their organization to break down for the auditable areas. For instance, certain organization, if you listen to their top management, this is one of my tips which I learned over the years and have observed in many companies in different part of the world, that in within the organization there is a tone by which the top management they talk about. Some organization you will find people they talk about in terms of products. So whichever presentation or whichever meetings they have, they will talk more about the profitability of the product, different product lines they have. Some organization they have more concern towards the departmental budgets, and within that context they talk. Some organization they more talk about the regional profits depending on your role. If you are a group auditor or if you are a regional auditor, then they might talk about the different companies, industries, and sectors. So based on your organization, let's say if you are working in a very diversified group, which I used to, so there you have to see that how is the tone within the organization. Let's say if it is they talk about more regional profits and regional activities, then I would rather recommend you to break down your organization into different regions. Within that regions, different companies. Within that, you can break down further to different departments. Let's say if you are working in a single entity or a single unit, then you can take your organization and see, does the organization, the talk within the organization is about more about the product lines or the services they offer, and they calculate the profitability based on those segments. Then you can divide your organization into auditable areas based on those activities or those processes. However, as a general easy way of doing this thing is to divide the organization within the auditable departments. This is the very bare minimum and bare basics where you cannot find it comfortable enough that to break down the organization into different auditable areas. So initially, whenever we talk about the risk-based audit, first of all, you have to determine the scope within which you have to choose the audit engagements which you will be proposing in your annual audit plan. So the tip which I can give you, if you do not want to get into complications, go with the departments. So break down your organization within the department and see within each department how many audit engagements in different areas you can carry out. So based on that, you can do. So this is one of the basic element, first step to do and to embark on the journey of risk-based audit. Yes, Alia, can we move to the next slide? So there is a question, poll question. I would like to know that how would you break down your organization into auditable areas? Will that be based on department? business line, geography, or any other? Yes, Aryan.
Well, majority is in the line of with department, and secondly is a combination of department and processes or products.
Great. So here, a very good point comes up that it could be in isolation. It could be combination of different things. For example, in a diversified group, we used to have regions. Within those regions, we used to have companies based on their sector, and within those companies, we used to have a departmental audit. So that's how we used to break down the auditable areas. So it could be a combination of different strategies, but generally the majority of the people which I can see is using a department if they are working within one entity. So that's how you can do. So let's move to the next step of the risk-based audit. So the next step is the most critical one is the risk assessment. So once you have the population that how many areas which you potentially can do audits to ensure the 100% coverage of the organization in terms of audit, then based on the limitation of resources, time, team, and many other factors, you cannot carry out all these, and neither it's desired nor it's effective to carry out a 100% audit. So here, what we do in order to choose which areas to perform the audit in annual plan is based on the risk assessment. Risk assessment in itself is a very vast topic, but here for this presentation, I will try to touch base on some of the key fundamentals, and then we will move on. Because it in itself is a big ocean, but we have to summarize for the purpose of our basic understanding, and then we can see how we can go about with the risk-based audit. So initially, in a risk-based audit, first of all, it's a requirement of the standard. And secondly, the key fundamental which you see, this is based on my experiences because since being a group auditor, as a group audit manager, I have observed different risk maturity of in different organizations, despite within a one group. So you will always find a diverse risk maturity within the organization. What is a risk maturity? Risk maturity is determined based on key fundamentals, which are how the organization is being governed. For example, if the organization have a board and committees, some of the key good elements of the risk mature organization I will give you, and if those elements are not present in your organization, you can presume that it's a less mature, risk mature organization. For example, you have a board and you have different committees which are independent, comprised of independent directors. For example, audit committee, nomination and remuneration committee. Sometimes you have a risk committee. Then you have, apart from those committees, you have set policies and procedures within the organization. You have risk appetite well defined within the organization. You have well defined delegation of authority within the organization. You have the previously so called the three line of defense mechanism within the organization in terms of having a process owner. Then we have a risk management, compliance, health and safety, fraud, controls departments within the organization. Then we have third line where it comes internal and external auditors we have. Then sometimes we have an assurance from the regulators and other bodies which keep on having a check on the based on the sector and industry which we are working. And generally within the organization, the tone from the top is that they emphasize the role of internal audit, compliance, and risk. and people take into account risk part of their decisions, making strategic decisions. And it's an element which is everyone is concerned about it. So this is some of the key elements within the organization. If these elements falls within your organization, it means that you are working with a risk mature organization. And then to apply those risk-based audit for key fundamentals is more easy for you. You can have an integrated risk management system by which you can carry out an annual risk assessment and annual audit plan. However, it is not to discourage you that if these elements are not part of your organization, that you are any bad organization. It's just that either it's not the need, or it's not the requirement by the law, or it's just the way they run their business. So risk immature organizations do exist in a big number. Sometimes even I have seen a lot of family businesses. They run their affairs in their own way, as they are not a public listed company where they have to comply with certain laws and regulation. So if those elements are not there, so you have to be wise enough how you maneuver and come up with a risk-based audit. So I will give you the tips in the next slide. Yes, Arya, can we go to the next slide? So the purpose of why I was telling you where to determine, first of all, the risk maturity of your organization is because the input in your risk assessment will be more easy to get from those different departments if you have a risk mature organization. For example, while doing a risk assessment, you can take the reports from the compliance function of non-conformities. You can take reports from the audit department, from the fraud department, that what are the fraud cases which has been encountered during the year, and what are the mitigating controls, and what is the current status. You can take the risk registers from the risk departments, health and safety issues, and then you can come up with your own idea that where our organization is leading towards, and what is the risk maturity of the organization. So based on that element, the risk assessment become more relevant and more fruitful for the annual plan. However, if you do not have those complexities, it's still an easy way to do that activity. But by doing that, you have to exert a little bit more effort, that you have to come up with the more risk assessment of, but based on your knowledge, previous audit engagement, and industry best practices if you have. So this is an element which is, I've stated in the start of the presentation, that the standard required us to have a documented risk assessment. And secondly, the Institute of Internal Auditor put an emphasis recently on the risk of fraud and IT risk, which we have to take into account, specifically in addition to other risk within our risk assessment. Yes, Alia, can we move to the next slide? So what are the key components of the risk assessment? So basically, if you remember in the start, we said it that you have to divide the entire organization into different auditable units. So once you do that and you reach out to the last, second, or third layer of the unit, let's say a department, then you take those departments, see what are the key elements within those department, what are the key risks within that particular department, and those you can know by the activities which the department perform. So you will take each risk, and then you will assess through following key components. What is the likelihood of that department, that risk to be materialized? For example, what is the possibility that this risk may materialize? Then what might be the impact of that risk? And once you have those, then you calculate what is the inherent risk associated with that activity which you have identified. And control risk is basically if there is an assessment, independent assessment, either second line or third line has carried out on those areas which you have identified crucial within that department, and what was their basis of, based on their assurance, or what were based on their testing, what were the basis on which they can conclude that whether those risks were mitigated within that controls or not. And then the residual risk will be the one which is leftover risk after despite having all the controls, or sometimes we just accept to have no controls because the benefit which we might reap out of having a stringent control will be less than not having a control. So these are the key elements. How you come up with this, there is a lot of data available online. There are different methodologies to follow your each activity and take through this whole likelihood, impact, inherent control, and residual risk of activities. I personally would rather encourage for the people to have it a simple methodology. There are, you can associate 1 to 5 number, 1 to 3 number to each element, or you can go high, medium, and low. There are different tools and softwares which are being used in especially in the financial services, which help you in coming up with the assessment. However, this is not a very scientific assessment. When you carry out, there is there will be some elements by which you can come up with the numbers, like if it drops the profitability by this, it will be high, and by that, if it will be medium and low. But there will be a lot of, like, for instance, reputational risk. You cannot assign any number or anything in terms of calculating that if it that much or this much, you can say it's high, medium, and low. It's more of a judgment based on the industry, based on your expertise. So do not get overwhelmed with this part of the risk assessment, because at the end there is a significant proportion of judgment involved. So what you are doing, rather than having nothing on paper, you are just populating an activity and carrying out through these methodologies to come up with something by which you can back up with some working, first of all. And secondly, in the process, your brain also start working, and then you see the things from different perspective. And by doing that, you come up with more logical way of determining your risk-based audits. So this is one of the key component, and I would say one of the most complicated section of the risk-based audit, which you can do it more of a simplistic way, or you can make it complicated, or you can take a software tool and devise this thing. Can we move to the next slide? So here is a more of a poll question for you people, which will give us a guideline that how things are happening with the audience. The annual risk assessment is carried out with which frequency in the audit department? So in your department, do you do a continuous risk assessment biannually or annually? And keeping in mind that you have to state what you are doing, not what is supposed to be done, because the standards say it's annually, but it doesn't mean that you have to do it annually. You can have it biannually, and the current practice in most of the advanced companies with sophisticated system is continuously.
Yes, we have annually vote majority.
Okay, so it is done annually. Why I ask this question? Because the growing trend is toward having it continuously, or at least quarterly. So, but for that, I've told you that those things can be performed, but for that, you need to have a sophisticated systems within the organization. Your organization risk maturity needs to be at a high level, and the industry and the sector which you are working is need to be very digitalized, like in tech-based companies where everything is digitalized. So if those elements are there, even there is a possibility to embed the controls testing within your processes. um, and you can have a continuous, certain areas you can have a continuous monitoring for the risk assessment, and accordingly you can have an exception reportings, and then you can have client audits if there is too much exceptions. So generally it is done annually, and I recommend that the majority of the organization which are not too much dynamic in nature in their sector and industry, they can have it in annually, because it takes a lot of time. And if your organization is less risk mature, then the onus to do that activity, sorry, is entirely falls on the internal auditor. Yes, Arya, can we go to the next slide? So here is another poll question, that how do you carry out the risk assessment manually in through Excels, within the Excels, or automated through the use of software? So this will highlight us that how the industry is moving toward. Are there a majority of the people who are using software tools
Manual,
or manual? This
manual.
is what I was expecting, with exception to few which are saying both, some are saying manual. Okay, especially in the financial sector, it is done in some banks automatically because it's a regulatory risk. So there it is more of a regulatory compliance issue. But generally, and in some good companies, some MNCs where they can have a big budgets and they can have the budget for softwares, there the auditors might use the automated, but generally it's manual. So irrespective of whether you use automated tools or manual, as long as you know the fundamentals and you know how to do it, it is fine. So you don't have to be like over concerned that if your organization is not using any automated tool, that you might lag behind with any auditor. The automated tools are just facilitating and giving you a comprehensive view with a more uh, better approach in terms of getting to the more accurate results. But however, sometimes it's the manual thing by which you come across based on the human judgment, uh, pick points, some areas which an automation through automated tools which might not encounter, and you found it like it's more relevant to the organizational objectives. Next slide. So aligning the risk assessment with the business objective. We are running short of the time, so I will try that how we can conclude. Okay, aligning the risk assessment with the business objectives. So I personally do not recommend, or I personally do not do. This is a very simplistic way of doing so because I have to keep things very simple. There will be beginners and there will be advanced users, but generally, this is how a risk assessment spreadsheet might look like. And I just populated some fake data. So you might have different, if you're working in a group or regions, you might have a different companies, or if you're working in a single entity, you might have a different departments. So if you have a different entity, you can populate it side and then use, if you are breaking down those entities based on the departments or based on those business lines, and within those business lines, departments, or it's entirely up to you. So generally, if you have an entity where you have different departments or different auditable areas which you feel like board affairs, corporate governance, HR, and finance, then you can populate. This is a very high level. You can even go even more into nitty-gritty details. You can, within that HR department or corporate governance, you can highlight significant activities against which you will carry out the risk assessment. But that all depends on how much time you have and how much resources you have and what is the risk maturity of the organization. And generally, I would say if you are a small team with a less risk mature organization, you go at a very high level rather than going into way too much details and spending 2 months of your time just in the planning process. Because these days the risks are very dynamic; it keep on changing. So no matter how much you try, at the end there might be a possibility of variation or a revision, maybe through management request, maybe through a board request, through anything. So based on your convenience, your personality, your approach, you can either detail it way too big or way too small. But this is just a snapshot. Like for example, if we have a corporate governance or board affairs area to be audited, the impact will be high, the likelihood is less. Inherently, there are different tables to use that if the impact is high and likelihood is less, inherently where it fall. And then you have a control risk based on the previous actual audits you have performed or any other second line of defense has performed. Residual risk, that this is again based on a matrix by which you can get the results. And then you can say, will that audit is supposed to be part of your annual audit plan or not? So you can possibly carry out all the high risk majority. The strategy for me, which worked out so far, is like 80% of the audit engagement should be high, and the remaining 10 to 15% medium. And depending on the organization, if you do not have too many high risk areas, so then you can have a different percentages. But the majority is supposed to be for the high risk, and then medium risk, and some element of low risk also you have to take in the risk-based audit. Why would I say a low risk when we are doing a risk assessment? Because as I have said in the start, that there is a lot of judgment involved. So it's so to avoid any judgment error that we might consider based on our assessment that it's a low, but as a business or towards the business objectives and strategy, it might come up with a high risk potential. So to avoid the judgment error, we have to take certain low risk as well. And surprisingly, at times, those low risk might be more adding value to the organization, and with some exceptions. So you take majority high, then medium and low. Yes, Alia, can we move to the next? So there is a poll question. Do you align your risk assessment with the strategic goal?
Yes, almost yes.
Yes. So basically, you can carry out your risk assessment independently, and then you can map those risk assessment and see those areas which you have highlighted, high, medium, and low. Is it what the organization is aiming towards? I've seen a practical problem here that most of the companies, their mission, their vision, their strategic goals, their plans are more of a documentation practice. They do not live by those things. So again, as I've said, if it is a less risk mature organization, those things will be part of a formalities than actual strategic direction. They will always have a goals, but those will be kind of implied, so which might not be documented in a refined document. So that you have to keep in mind. You cannot be fooled by companies documents which in essence they do not follow. You can take those inputs, but again you have to use your judgment to be more relevant to the audience, to the board, to the management. So just bear in mind, like the annual plan which the organization submits or the strategic goals which they define, do they live by, or it is just a documentation process, but the inside tone or the implied things within the board meetings, within the management meetings, the goals and the strategic direction is different. If it is different, so use your judgment. So based on those judgment, you can feel like, is it relevant to align those risk assessment engagements to those objectives which you believe is more strategic and important to the organization or not. Yes, Adia, can we go to the next slide? So basically, this is all which I've discussed about the prioritization. However, there is one tip which I would like to share that you can have when you come up with the risk assessment. There will be still a lot of engageable, auditable areas. So keep the category one and category two based on your alignment with the organizational objectives. What is category one? Category one will be the high importance which you will propose in annual audit plan. Category B will be the kind of this is a safety net for you. For example, for any reasons, you might not be possible, or it might not be possible for auditors to carry out that audit engagement, maybe because of non-availability of the resources by the businesses or due to any business change or anything. So then you can have those safety net audits which you can propose to carry out in the absence of any limitation, I mean, in the presence of any limitation. Yes, Alia, can we move to the next slide? So here is the poll question. Do you have a reserve audit category in case if you are unable to do your plan audit engagement. I just need to know this. So is there something like, if for example you wouldn't be able to perform your, let's say, 5 or 10 audits in a year, so is there is something for you which you can propose rather than being idle and confused?
It's a mixed combination answer.
Yeah, I was expecting also the same, that it will be a mix, because some auditors they do, some auditors they don't. But generally, I would recommend you, if you don't do this practice, you can have it. You can have it draft. You can keep it for the rainy days, for example, because we all know when you get into the field, there is a lot of challenges which internal auditor has to face, and there is a high level of possibility that due to scope limitation or any other reason, you might not be able to perform those planned audits. So there you can come up to the board, to the audit committee, or to the board, or in some exceptionally organization, to the head of the organization to carry out those audits which you believe is still important based on your risk assessment. So while having those options, you have a documentation behind. So if anyone asks why this, so you can come up with any good idea, like why it is you believe in the absence of that audit engagement, you can still perform the other one, which is still relevant to the organization. Next slide. So based on all these discussions, you come up with a draft auditable engagements, and these are since now based on your risk-based assessment, which you have carried out. So this become part of a risk-based audit. This draft report, this draft auditable areas you presented based on your organization reporting line, if it is to the board or audit committee for the review and suggestion. If they don't, if they have any, you take it back, you redraft again, you take into account those areas, and then present again for approval. However, I will always recommend, based on your organizational need and the inclusiveness of audit with the business operation, you might be asked to carry out certain special requests. Those are called advisory assignments or pervasive audit needs. So if you have that, so see the process trend. If it is like 30% of the time you spend on special requests, so take into account those areas. And if it is less than that, then also you can take into account. But as a general rule of thumb, keep 20% of your time, 10 to 20% of your time for any unplanned request by the board or by the audit committee, and sometimes by the management with the approval of board or audit committee. So that give a very holistic view to the internal audit plan. Now we have a poll question. Do you, yeah, do you, yes, Alia. So what is the percentage of progressive audit or special assignment percentage in your annual audit plan? It is just to have an understanding of how the the practitioner, the audit professionals are going, or they can plan less than 20%, less than 40%, 20 to 30%, 40%, 10%. Yes, can you draw any
Uh,
conclusion?
20 to 30%.
20 to 30%. This is what is recommended. Like it should not cross more than 30%, because then the objective of audit department is somehow being compromised, because our key fundamental role is to provide assurance, not to provide advisories. However, we have to cater for the advisories based on the value addition which we can bring to the organization, keeping our independence intact. So I think 20 to 30% is a good number to go about it. The last poll question, Arya. So this is for me that do you believe that this session had after this session you achieve your learning objective from the session? Any answer will allow me that to formulate maybe a next webinar or a study session by which I can come up with more easy way of delivering message for the masses to benefit from. And with this, I conclude my presentation and and hope that you might have gained something out of this presentation and best
Definitely.
wishes.
Yes, we are happy to have
Okay,
you.
that's good. That's good.
Okay, so we can have the QA session now.
Yeah, Alia, but I have to leave. So we can have two or three questions and then I have other engagements. So I'm still under the
Okay, let's
working
just
hours. So
have
yes.
quickly questions. The rest of you can email us and we'll get back to you with the queries, your queries from Arif. Okay, can we have the questions, please? Do you recommend any software to automate?
Well, I do not recommend because there are a lot of softwares in the market, and honestly, to me, also it's confusing. I would rather recommend you that if, for example, when we were choosing for our group, we invited different software companies to give us a demo. So you take a demo, you see what is more user friendly and which is more less complicated in terms of interface. So you can take any decision based on your business requirement because different entities have different business needs. So and different because without having a holistic view of five or six softwares demo, you cannot come up with anyone. So I say anything which is more relevant to your budget, your business needs, and simplicity. So look for these elements before engaging in any software solution.
Okay, another is what are the framework best practices for RBIA?
See, the framework, I personally do not see any other framework other than Institute of Internal Auditor, which can give you a more holistic guideline for a risk-based internal audit. However, there is a lot of subjectivity involved. So even those frameworks which might be so-called or considered a more mature, even they take it things in generic way. So I would say just take the fundamentals and apply and read and see what can more be applied within your context, within the context of your organization and culture.
Okay, another question is what have the auditors to do if the auditee didn't have any risk register? As I know, the auditors can approach with a risk factor, but how the way to do it?
Yeah, this is a very common problem which in internal auditor encounter in a less risk mature organization, or maybe if the organization doesn't have a second line of defense. Uh, I would not recommend that the auditors start making a risk registers, but rather they, based on their assessment, their judgment, based on the documents, whichever is available to them, maybe past audit reports of those auditable areas, and to see that where do they believe that that area or that department falls in terms of high, medium, and low, and accordingly use their judgment and whatever basic information they have. One of the best ways is also to have a dialogue with the key people in that that in that department to develop that best understanding and see what are the challenges they are facing. So this will give also a holistic way how to use your judgment in order to populate the risk assessment.
The last one is there any conflict of interest if audit is involved in risk assessment?
I personally do not see, this is one of the fundamental which we have to carry it out. However, when you have a risk department, it make our auditors' life easy to take those risk register and still carry out our independent assessment. So we anyways carry out our independent assessment, whether there is a risk management team or not. So I do not see any conflict of interest.
Okay, thank you so much, Arif Zaman, for your
Thank you,
time.
Alia. Thank you very much for your time.
And thank you, audience, for your time. And keep watching. We will be back soon with another episode for Auditors League. Thank you very much. Okay, take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye